Hello everybody and welcome back to another ship review. And yes, I did actually say initially that I wasn't going to be doing anything other than Captain's Academy, but I've hit a bit of a, let's say a roadblock with some of them. There's some things that I'm still working on, so figured with a little bit of extra time that I have, might as well just do one of these. And today, of course, I'm going to be reviewing this premium Tier 7 Soviet destroyer, the Leningrad. And she is actually quite a good ship. Not on paper initially, but after a while, yeah, and you play her, you do find her strengths, and she has quite a few of them. So, as many of my other ship reviews, I'm just going to go over the stats, then I'm going to look at modules, and of course recommended captain skills, and then I'm going to show you some battles. So first up, let's take a look at all of her stats. First up, survivability wise, 15,200 hit points is a very good HP pool. She's a little bit short of the Bliskavitsa, which has 15,500, but compared to the other Soviet Tier 7 destroyer, the Kiev, even when fully upgraded, she has way more hit points because the Kiev only has 12,800 max. So Leningrad, hit points wise, very good at 15,200. She does have, of course, slightly less gun firepower, and she also has one turret in a slightly awkward position. She's got 5 of these single 130mm guns, reload time 5 seconds, 180-degree turn time 27.7 seconds is a little bit on the slow side. Max dispersion's okay, 95 meters. HE shell damage, it is Russian HE shells, so they are actually a little bit weaker than the US or Japanese HE shells, but I mean, with the rate of fire and the fact that you can hit things at range relatively easily, it's not that bad. Chance of fire, 8%. Really do need Demo Expert. That is a very helpful skill. AP damage, 2,500. It's okay. I mean, again, you're going to be firing a lot of HE with this ship, although in certain occasions when things are giving you broadside and are somewhat closer, you will be using AP. But like many other Russian ships, even though she has really good shell velocity, which means her arcs are really nice, and her air drag value for the shells tend to be rather low, so that means they do keep their speed quite well. Their corrupt values do tend to be rather poor, so at distance, their penetration isn't all that great, although up close they tend to be quite good. Maximum range, 11.6 kilometers is okay. I mean, compared to the Bliskavitsa, which has 12, or something like the Anshan, which is 11.9, it is a little bit less. If you look at the Kiev actually has a little bit more on the gun range as well. Fully upgraded with the FCS, the Kiev is 12.3. So Leningrad does have a little bit less range, but when I played her, I did say she was quite good, and the reason why she's quite good is because she has good torpedoes. If you take a look at them, you've got 2 of these quad sets of torpedo launchers, which means each time you fire, you get a maximum of 8 torpedoes, which is a very good number. These torpedoes have 8-kilometer range, and they go 60 knots, so these are nice, fast torpedoes. In a way, the Leningrad plays a little bit more like the Gremyashi at Tier 5, than she does the Kiev. The Kiev is almost solely a gunboat, with torpedoes only really good for ambush, while the Leningrad can actually transition between guns and torpedoes. Although her torpedoing is more effective if you have Concealment Expert. Without it, the stealth torping range is a little bit on the low side, although still manageable, especially if ships are coming towards you. The other reason I like the fact that she has 8-kilometer torpedoes is the Leningrad becomes workable during things like cyclones. A time where if you're in a Kiev, you might struggle a little bit because you really kind of have to close the suicide range, something you don't have to do when you're in a Leningrad. And so this combination of pretty decent guns and pretty good torpedoes puts her, if you look at the destroy spectrum, a little bit closer to that hybrid role. The roles that are currently primarily centered around the US destroyers. And so the Leningrad, even though it's a Russian destroyer, does at times play a little bit more like the US destroyers. Taking a look at her AA, it's destroyer AA. It's nothing that special. Yeah, occasionally you might bag a plane here and there, but nothing really to talk about when it comes to her AA. Maneuverability is another place where the Leningrad shines. 43 knot top speed. This is one really fast destroyer. And if you take a look at everything else, the Farragut, which is a tier down, 36.5, right? Sims, faster, 38.5. If you take a look at the Mahan, which is here, the Mahan goes 35, pretty slow. If you take a look at something like the Kiev, which is really fast already, 42.5. So the Kiev is actually a bit slower than the Leningrad. If you look at the Bliskovica, it's 39. Anshan is 38. So Leningrad, very fast destroyer, 43 knots. However, when I played with her, I did find that at times her acceleration did seem a tiny bit on the slow side. So sometimes getting up to speed maybe not as snappy, but once you get up to speed, she really does very well. And of course, if you pop speed boost, you are very zippy. Turning circle radius, though, 690 meters is a little bit on the big side. She is a relatively big destroyer. If you compare her to some of the US destroyers, where you're looking at like 500 meters, or the Bliskovica, which is 610, the Leningrad, a little bit big on the turning circle radius. However, rudder shift time is very good if you have the rudder shift module. You can get it down to 3 seconds, so that's a very fast rudder shift. That actually is with the module. Without the module, you're probably looking at around 3.7, if I remember correctly. And yep, 3.7. All right. Finally, the last thing we've got to talk about is her concealment. And her concealment is a very interesting stat. Surface concealment, 7.3 kilometers is where her detectability is. That's a very good number because that means that if you run up against something like a Bliskovica and you have concealment expert, you're going to be stealthier by a little bit. If you look at something like the Sims, you're at the identical detectability. If you go and compare against the Mahan, and there we go, there's the Mahan. Mahan is 7.9. And if you compare it to something like the Hatsuharu is the only one that's going to be stealthier than you, with the stock detectability at 6.7 without anything. So this is why I said the Leningrad is much more like the US destroyers, where she actually has some stealth to play with. If you take a look at something like the Kiev, by the way, Kiev surface detectability, 9 kilometers. So the Leningrad, you can actually play that more US NDD role, which is quite nice because you aren't always the one to be spotted first. Now, also because that detectability is so good, Concealment Expert becomes a very viable skill. And this ship, I think, will be quite viable in competitive play as well, mostly because she does have that extra torpedo firepower. The Bliskovica, as we know, is a very good tier 7 destroyer, but when it comes to her torpedoes, she's only got triple sets. The Leningrad, the quad sets. And not only that, but the Leningrad's torpedoes are faster, and they do a bit more damage. The Bliskovica's does 14,400, Leningrad torpedoes do 15,100. So in terms of her versatility, the Leningrad is very unlike the other Soviet destroyers and much more similar to the US ones, and I think that makes her a very good destroyer. She just has a lot of flexibility that some of the other Russian destroyers lack. In terms of recommended modules, well, I would just say go with main armament modification 1. You could go with magazine modification 1 if detonations are something that worries you, but I really just don't want my guns to get knocked down and things like that, so I would go for this. There's, of course, also many benefits, including torpedo tubes becoming more survivable as well. So very good module to get on the first slot. Second slot, I would go for aiming systems mod 1. You could make an argument for main battery mod 2, but again, because she's sort of in that hybrid US role, you do want your rate of fire. If you get into a knife fight, you want to be able to pump out as many shells as possible. And then, of course, you want to go for damage control system mod 1, just to increase your resistance to torpedo damage even by the smallest amount possible, as well as also reduce the chance of fires. And then, of course, on the final slot here, you have a choice, I think. I personally went for steering gears mod 2, and I liked it. But I guess you could make the argument for propulsion system mod 1, just to get that faster acceleration at the start. Could be something to think about. Captain-wise, well, captain-wise is where things are quite interesting. So here we go. There is a couple of different builds for the captain. Currently, I've set it up with the same way that I've set my Khabarovsk captain up, which is ideal for random battles. And for that, you want to go with basic firing training on the first slot. And you can go for last stand on the second slot. then you want to go for Superintendent, then you want to go for Demo Expert. Now, here's where there's a little bit of variability. You can either go for AFT, which is the way I've played it. In randoms, AFT and Demo is a very lethal combination. However, in competitive play, you might want to sacrifice one of these two, whether it's Demo or AFT, depending on your playstyle, whether you want more fires or more range, and get Concealment, but that's only in competitive. In randoms, I'm okay with just having these two. Once you get those first 14 skills out of the way, you want to now consider your next skills. And the next skills I would go for would be Expert Marksman, and then finally with my last two skills, I would get Torpedo Armament Expertise. If, however, you decide to go with Concealment Expert, so let's say you went Basic Firing Training, Last Stand, you went Superintendent, let's say you went AFT or Demo, and then you went Concealment, then I would still opt to get Expert Marksman next, and whatever remaining skill is really up to you. So that pretty much wraps it up from the port view. Let's take it into battle, and I'll show you how she does. So remember the key thing about the Leningrad, which is the Leningrad plays a little bit more like US destroyers than, let's say, the Russian destroyers. So while you're playing Russian destroyers, you're a little bit more of a second line supporting destroyer, and caps are usually a little bit further down the priority list, unless of course you get into an open cap. With the Leningrad, cap does become a much higher priority because you are able to get onto cap and engage enemy ships. Now you do have to pay attention to the tier that you're in. If you run into a tier 9 battle, you play a little bit more like a Russian destroyer, standing off at range and shooting people, and then of course when caps are open you go in. On the other hand, if you're at, like, let's say a tier 7 battle where maybe not a lot of ships have Concealment Expert yet, and the only thing stealthier than you is, let's say, a Hatsuharu, then you should be going for cap. So in this particular case, I actually have both a Nicholas and a Hatsuharu, and I'm still just trying to get in there and contest it. It's a little bit hard in this particular case, as my support isn't really there yet, and the Hatu is both in smoke and can spot me because of the Nicholas, so I am having to play a little bit more defensively, having to eventually get off cap. But I am going to stay in the area and I'm going to contest it. And I'm going to eventually bag the destroyers and get myself onto the cap and try my best to cap it. Unfortunately, I actually don't get this one. I think somebody else did. But that is what you're supposed to be doing with the Leningrad. Now, if, however, you end up, let's say, a higher tier battle, and let's say you're running into ships like maybe the Benson or the Kagero or Fubuki, ships that are going to be significantly more stealthy than you because they have both the Concealment module and the Concealment Expert skills, then you're going to play a little bit more that gunboating role. So think about the Leningrad as sort of being flexible between either at, let's say, the lower tiers, where you're like tier 6 or 7, where you're playing that US destroyer role, contesting caps and things like that, to when you get to the higher tiers, you become more of that traditional gunboat Russian destroyer role, just harassing people at range with guns. And actually with the Leningrad, you can also use your torpedoes. The torpedoes, like I mentioned earlier, are much nicer than other Russian destroyers at tier 7. Well, actually there is only one, the Kiev. It has much nicer torpedoes because they have usable range. They're 8-kilometer torpedoes, they're pretty good in terms of damage, and they're pretty fast. Which means that in the event that you run into something like a Cyclone, which is starting to become I think a little bit more common than before, as you'll tend to see it on more and more maps. If you have a Cyclone, this ship isn't without weaponry. You are able to deal with the enemy ships using torpedoes and just firing them from stealth. And of course, in Cyclones in the past, you generally had to suicide range into enemy ships in order to get those torpedoes off. And sometimes, if you run into something with really good secondaries, thinking something like the Gneisenau or the Bismarck or something like that, closing to suicide range is not a very good thing, as you generally are going to get wrecked. So it is nice to be able to fire them from stealth. Now, I do have to point out that if you are intending to use torpedoes a lot more frequently, now personally for me, I'm more of a gunboating person, and torpedoes, yeah, I'll use them, but as a little bit less frequent. And so generally, I've opted for things that are gun focused, which is Demo Expert and Advanced Firing Training. However, if you're thinking about torpedoes more, you really should get Concealment Expert. It'll just give you that extra little bit of a safety, an extra buffer zone, than without it, right? Without it, you have basically a 700-meter safety zone that you can fire torpedoes, and sometimes that's cutting a bit close. As I did mention, this ship's turning radius is a little bit on the big side. She isn't super quick to turn around. So that is something you want to think about. And yeah, actually did remember that I didn't get this cap. I cleared both the destroyers off, but no cap for me. Well, I'm sad. Anyways, okay, so the good thing about, of course, focusing on guns is that you can shoot stuff really, really far away. And Russian destroyers, generally speaking, their arcs are nice enough that things out to 13 kilometers, you can generally hit with quite a high degree of accuracy. And of course, having Demo Expert when you're focusing primarily on guns is very, very beneficial, as you do get to set fires, and fires are basically the ultimate annoyance. So right now, with the Bayern being basically the sole remaining battleship here, I'm taking a look on the minimap, and I'm seeing that the enemy team is making a push through around the 4 and 5 lines. They're coming down towards the sea cap, so I'm basically going to go back and try to help and defend, realizing that right about now that there's about only a minute and a half before the cyclone starts to roll in, and I pretty much have to get back there if I want to help my team defend that. Once the cyclone comes in, it might be a bit harder to actually defend stuff because, again, every ship has to get into brawling range and fights can become very, very lopsided. You're also going to have to forgive this somewhat cruddy aim that I had during this battle. I was a little bit on the distracted side, so some of my shots were really just going way out there. Still did manage to get a bow fire, which is nice. Somebody else got a stern fire, which is nice, so that Bayern is going to burn for a while. Alright, so yeah, ignoring this Bayern because Bayern is, well, he's pretty much out of the action right now, basically being forced back by fires, and of course there are those torpedoes. So yeah, that's not good for the Bayern. He's gone. Alright, so Bayern taken care of. So we're clear on this side. My expectation is that with the enemy team pushing south, the 2 ships that are north on my team, one of them hopefully will go for the cap. Although, you know, depending on team, sometimes not the best thing, but that's okay. Gonna come in here, and I see a Nagato, and this is the important thing again. Remember the lessons about how to torpedo, right? Take a look at the Nagato and take a look at where that Nagato could potentially go. There's really only 2 places. The Nagato could go and continue on the same line, on the G line, and try to cut between the other 2 islands at around G6. Or the Nagato is going to turn south, and by turning south, going to expose that broadside. So you'll see how I do my torpedoes here. I'm taking a look at the Nagato's movement. I'm like, oh, okay, I see it. I'm going to lay a nice little torpedo wall for that Nagato. So when that Nagato actually turns fully broadside, that should be the wall that the Nagato runs into. And again, like I mentioned earlier, nice torpedoes means that you can actually do this without being spotted. This Nagato has no clue that I'm here. Cyclone has triggered, and of course with the triggering of the cyclones, that means I'm going to be depending a little bit more on my torpedoes than my guns. Also, my HP isn't looking too great at this moment. I've got like 3,900 HP, which is a little bit on the fragile side for a destroyer. So I'm probably going to try to offer torpedoes more and play it a little bit more safe. So 2 torpedo hits, get flooding, manage to defend the cap from the Nagato, and of course with flooding, there's the fire, and this combination is lethal. And this is one of the reasons why I really like having Demo Expert, because, you know, the chances of having fires, if you can combo it with flooding, becomes a deadly combination. Typically when ships get hit by torpedoes and they flood, they really do have to burn the damage control parties unless they want to just kind of paddle around at really slow speeds. And so most battleships, they, generally speaking, as soon as they start flooding, they hit that repair. And if you're able to land fires, then so much the better. In that Nagato's case, it might not have actually had the opportunity to even put out the flooding because I think he burned his Damacon earlier. Alright, so Nagato's out of the way. There is a Bayern. There is another battleship behind the Bayern, and there is 1 cruiser. Probably not the best group of ships to be running into in a really low HP destroyer, but like I mentioned, stealth is pretty good, and of course, you know, the Leningrad is actually quite good in terms of survivability. If I was in a Kiev, I'd be at a couple hundred HP, and that would be real risky. Plus, Kiev only has 4-kilometer torps, so But with the Leningrad, at least I can get in there, launch a couple of stealth torpedoes, fire at stuff maybe, and try to keep things from capping by resetting. And of course, I actually haven't really even done the whole hide and smoke thing yet. So that is something that the Leningrad is perfectly capable of doing. Do keep in mind though, it is Russian smoke. You don't get a USN smoke in here. So the smoke's duration isn't as good. I think that's like the only shortcoming of this ship compared to maybe the US destroyers. But still, I do like the versatility, something that the other Russian destroyer at tier 7 just doesn't really have sometimes. The Kiev is at times very restricted. So torpedo wall, get a shot in there, 2 hits, not really much in terms of damage, and of course Bayern does get away. So, wall failed. Alright, that's fine. Fire my guns. This time I am spotted, and so what I'm going to eventually be doing here is probably popping smoke, although right now, no immediate rush to do that. Bayern fires, no hits. Alright, so what I do is, again, exploiting that border of the cyclone, right? Popping out of 8 kilometers to disappear, popping back in, take a shot, pop back out, pop back in. As a destroyer, you really have to use that boundary of the cyclone to great effect. If you're dealing with cyclones, and I know some destroyers really get fed up with cyclones. Cyclones, as long as you do that, you just pop in, pop out, pop in, pop out, you will drive the big ships crazy. Battleships hate things that constantly appear and then disappear. It's like a magic disappearing act, and it just absolutely drives them nuts. One other thing, by the way, is that with any Russian destroyer, and in particular the Leningrad, you have to know when to switch to armor piercing. So there's an Ashigara. You'll see that initially I'm hitting with HE. I set my fire, and there I go. I've swapped over to AP now because the broadside has been shown. And when you get broadsides, just start pumping AP shots into the enemy ship. AP does very, very solid damage at quite a fast pace too because of the rate of fire on these Russian destroyers. So there we go. That Ashigara is gone. Managed to bag myself. That would be kill number 3. Unfortunately, still no new torpedo hits, so oh well, what can you do about that? Alright, so now with the Ashigara gone, there's only the Bayern that's over there, and there is one other ship. There's another battleship down south, except we have, I believe, a Warspite over here who's engaging the Bayern. So with the Bayern's attention mostly on the Warspite, I again open up with HE and of course swap over to AP as soon as I get a bit more of a broadside. Then I'm going to get some decent damage rolls, even though it's only 2 guns, as my guns are not fully traversed around yet. But pew pew, where's my... oh, okay, no kill there. And of course, might as well take a beach vacation. Actually, that's not even a beach, that's a nice rocky hillside. Let's go rock climbing in the middle of a cyclone. I'm going to just back out slowly and pretend I didn't derp there. And then I'm going to make my way onto Sea Cap, take it back for my team, and we should have this win in the bag. Now, generally speaking, with the Leningrad, I did find that in pretty much all the battles I was in, even at the higher tier battles, I was able to do decently well with this ship. Like the fact that I had guns that were pretty good, I had torpedoes that were pretty good, gave me a lot of flex room with this ship. Something that I find is a bit lacking sometimes with some of the other Russian destroyers. And I like that. I enjoyed having that flexibility. It allowed me to feel like if I ran into a battleship, I had more than just super short-range torpedoes to deal with them. This Koenig here, well, had he not decided to go for the ram, I probably could have torped him. I had torpedoes ready, but it looked like he was going for the ram, and I didn't really want to risk torpedoing the Warspite. I did have one really unfortunate incident. If you guys noticed during the port section, I had a pink name. I was in another battle with the Leningrad. I fired 2 HE shells. I didn't even notice, but those 2 HE shells hit a friendly battleship. I set a fire. I burned it for 10k damage, and it turned me pink. So, anyways, okay, that's a completely different story. All right. And of course, yeah, I mean, the Koenig rammed the Warspite, didn't kill the Warspite, so Warspite got diehard, nice. And then of course, enemy Budioni here, I load AP, and this is just a very, very easy KS because nice fast shells that are sort of the hallmark of Russian destroyers, and I was able to get those shells in there and steal the kill, which is okay. I mean, I had a kill taken from me earlier too, right? Alright, so then I'm going to capture this base as a base assist, and that's pretty much this battle. There was nothing else that really happened, so let's jump ahead and take a look at the results. I actually do okay in this battle. Wasn't like one of those amazing, 150k plus battles, but it was a very nice battle overall. It's just nicely balanced everywhere. In terms of credits, by the way, if you're OCD, you're going to hate that number, 440,001. I got 5,991 experience, 800 free experience. I got 78,000 damage, which is okay. It's a nice, respectable number, shall we say, for a tier 7 destroyer. Get like 2 torpedo hits, which is okay. 11 fires, 2 flooding. Got 5 base defense, 1 assist capture. Well, that's all pretty good. In terms of base experience, I was definitely top of the team by a pretty comfortable margin. My base experience here would be, and there we go, 2,282. So that's a very solid amount of base experience. And again, you're able to get nice amounts of base experience because you're able to get onto caps and really, either defend them or contest them or actually cap them for yourself. So again, that's an advantage of the Leningrad that you wouldn't get if you were playing something like the Kiev. In terms of the damage itself, it's all very nicely balanced. If you take a look at my main battery damage, there's 33,000 from HE and AP, got 21,000 in torpedoes, I got 23,000 from flooding and fires. It's a nice overall balanced damage total. And then finally, in terms of credits, if you take away all the deductions and everything, you would make money. Like if this is a premium ship, you're going to make credits. So final verdict for this ship. If you like the more hybrid destroyer play, where your guns and your torpedoes are equally viable, and you're missing that option on the Russian destroyer line, then definitely get the Leningrad. She offers something unique that the other Russian destroyers, with I think the possible exception of the Gremyashi, the other ones just don't really have until you get to the end game tiers, which is tier 9 and 10. So I definitely think this ship is actually worth it. Anyways, folks, I hope you enjoyed this ship review video. Let me know what you think. Take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.